The air was sharp and biting as Liam Hudson pedaled down the quiet streets of his small neighborhood. The sun barely peeked over the horizon, painting the houses on Cedar Lane with a muted orange glow. It was a morning like any other, or so he thought. Liam adjusted the strap of his worn backpack filled with newspapers, his breath forming faint clouds in the crisp air. Delivering newspapers wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. His family had fallen on hard times after his dad's accident, and the extra income helped keep the lights on and food on the table. As Liam coasted toward the end of the lane, his eyes fell on the last house, a sagging structure with peeling paint and overgrown hedges. Mr. Bernard Darrow's house. The old man had lived there for as long as Liam could remember, though he rarely came outside. His house always had an air of mystery, and the neighborhood kids spun wild stories about him being a recluse or a hoarder. Liam usually tossed the newspaper onto Mr. Darrow's porch and pedaled away without a second glance. But today, something was different. The front door was ajar, just a crack, swaying gently in the wind. He stopped his bike and frowned. That wasn't like Mr. Darrow at all. The man was known for keeping to himself, his curtains always drawn, his house locked up tight. Liam hesitated, glancing up and down the empty street. The silence felt heavier than usual, as if the houses themselves were holding their breath. Against his better judgment, he walked his bike closer to the house and called out, "Mr. Darrow, it's Liam. I brought your paper." No response. The closer Liam got, the more he noticed. The air near the house smelled sour, a rancid, suffocating staleness that made his stomach churn. He wrinkled his nose, his heart thumping in his chest. Peering through the crack in the door, he saw the outline of Mr. Darrow. The old man stood just inside the threshold, one hand gripping the doorframe for balance. His grey hair was disheveled, his face pale and hollow, and his clothes hung on him like a skeleton's. His breathing was shallow, a faint rasp that barely escaped his chest. "Mr. Darrow?" Liam called again, his voice cracking. "Are you all right?" The old man's eyes flickered toward Liam but didn't focus. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Liam felt a wave of panic. Something was very wrong. He took a step back, his instincts telling him to leave, but his conscience rooted him in place. He couldn't just walk away. Pulling out his phone, his fingers trembled as he dialed. "What's your emergency?" The dispatcher's calm voice grounded him, but only slightly. "There's a man here. I think he's really sick. He's not responding properly," Liam stammered. "It's the house at the end of Cedar Lane, number 47. Please send someone." "We'll dispatch paramedics immediately. Stay with him if you can, but don't enter the house," the dispatcher instructed. Liam stayed on the line, relaying what little information he had, as he watched Mr. Darrow slump further against the doorframe. He wanted to reach out and help the man, but the smell and the ominous darkness inside the house held him back. Minutes later, the distant wail of sirens broke the eerie silence. Paramedics pulled up, their flashing lights cutting through the gloom. Liam stepped aside as they rushed to Mr. Darrow, their voices calm but urgent as they worked to stabilize him. Liam felt a knot in his stomach as he watched them load the frail man onto a stretcher. For a moment, Mr. Darrow's hand weakly reached toward Liam, his eyes locking onto the boy's. Though faint, Liam thought he saw gratitude in those hollow eyes. But as the ambulance drove away, the relief Liam felt was quickly replaced by a sinking realization. Around him, neighbors were stepping out of their homes, their eyes narrowing and their voices whispering, "What's going on over there? Why's the paperboy at Darrow's house? He shouldn't have called anyone. That old man doesn't want attention." Liam swallowed hard, suddenly feeling exposed. Had he done the right thing, or had he just made things worse? Just when you think things couldn't get more complicated, life has a way of throwing another twist your way. The next morning, the usually quiet Cedar Lane buzzed with murmurs and sidelong glances. Liam Hudson, back on his paper route, felt the weight of those stairs with every turn of his bike wheels. Doors that used to creak open with cheerful greetings now stayed shut. Curtains that once fluttered as neighbors waved now stayed firmly drawn. It started when he approached Mrs. Whitaker's house, a neat little bungalow with rose bushes in the front yard. She had always been kind, often leaving cookies or hot chocolate out for Liam on colder mornings. But today, her door didn't open when he knocked. Instead, he heard her voice through the thin wood. "Just leave it on the step, Liam," she said curtly. The tone was colder than the winter air. Liam sighed, setting the paper down and stepping back. He glanced at her window, but the curtain shifted quickly, as though she didn't want him to see her watching. At the next house, Mr. Collier, a retired cop with a booming voice, stood on his porch, arms crossed. Liam hesitated as the older man shook his head. "Kid," he said, his tone heavy with disapproval, "you should have minded your own business. People like Bernard Darrow, they're private for a reason. You just stirred up trouble." Liam opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He bit back the lump rising in his throat and pedaled away. Each house he passed felt like another judgment, another cold shoulder. The once welcoming neighborhood now felt like enemy territory. By the time Liam finished his route, he was exhausted, not from the physical effort, but from the emotional toll. He leaned his bike against the side of his house and slumped onto the porch steps. The memory of Mr. Darrow's hollow eyes and faint "thank you" played over and over in his mind. Had he done the right thing, or had he just made everything worse? That evening, as Liam sat at the dinner table, picking at his plate of spaghetti, his mum noticed his unusually quiet demeanor. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Liam shrugged. "It's the neighbors. They're upset because I called for Mr. Darrow." His mom set down her fork, her face softening. "You did the right thing, Liam. Don't let them make you doubt that." "But what if they're right?" Liam muttered. "What if I just made everything worse for everyone?" His mom reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on his. "Liam, sometimes doing the right thing means upsetting people. But that doesn't mean it wasn't the right thing to do." Her words helped, but only a little. The knot in Liam's chest still felt as tight as ever. The next day, as Liam began his paper route, something unusual happened. A sleek black car pulled up beside him, the engine purring softly. The driver's door opened, and a tall man in a sharp coat stepped out. "Liam Hudson?" the man asked. Liam blinked, gripping the handlebars of his bike. Yeah, that's me." The man extended a hand, his expression both serious and grateful. "I'm Dr. Evan Darrow. Bernard Darrow is my father. I heard you're the one who called for help yesterday." Liam nodded slowly. "Yeah, he didn't look good. I thought someone needed to do something." Dr. Darrow's face softened. "You thought right. You saved his life, Liam. If you hadn't called, I don't know if he would have made it through the night." Liam felt his throat tighten. "Really?" Dr. Darrow nodded. "He's stable now, but it was close. I wanted to thank you personally." The doctor reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, handing it to Liam. "It's not much, but my dad insisted we give you this." Liam looked at the envelope, his fingers hesitating. I can't take this." "Yes, you can," Dr. Darrow said firmly. "What you did took courage. Most people would have walked away." As Liam pedaled back home, the envelope from Dr. Darrow tucked in his pocket, he felt a mix of emotions. Relief, pride, but also unease. The doctor's gratitude had eased some of his doubts, but it couldn't drown out the voices of his neighbors. And as much as he wanted to believe he'd done the right thing, their judgment still weighed heavily on him. When he turned onto Cedar Lane, his unease deepened. Groups of neighbors had gathered in driveways, talking in hushed tones, their glances darting toward him like arrows. Liam swallowed hard, pedaling faster. The whispers didn't stop. "Who does he think he is, meddling like that?" one voice said. "Always sticking his nose where it doesn't belong," another muttered. Liam gritted his teeth and kept his head down, his heart pounding. He didn't understand how helping someone in need could make him the villain of the street. The next morning, Liam approached Mrs. Whitaker's house again. She stood outside watering her roses, but when she saw him, she turned her back and hurried inside. The door slammed shut, leaving him standing awkwardly on the porch with her newspaper in hand. Further down the street, Mr. Collier was already on his porch, sipping coffee. He watched Liam approach, his eyes hard. "You know," Mr. Collier said, as Liam handed him the paper, "you stirred up a lot of trouble for this street. Old Bernard wanted to be left alone. You think you're a hero or something?" Liam felt his cheeks burn. "I didn't do it to be a hero. he needed help. Mr. Collier shook his head. Sometimes, kid, people don't want your help. Liam clenched his fists but said nothing. What was the point? He wasn't going to change their minds. As he walked back to his bike, he could feel their stares following him, heavy and judgmental. The isolation became a daily occurrence. At school, Liam tried to focus on his classes, but the knot in his stomach refused to go away. He replayed the scenes in his head. Mr. Darrow's frail figure, the ambulance lights, the doctor's gratitude, the neighbor's whispers. It all blurred together, leaving him exhausted and confused. That evening, as he sat at the dinner table, his mom noticed his silence again. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "is it still about the neighbors?" Liam nodded. "They hate me, Mom. They think I did the wrong thing." She sighed, setting down her fork. "People are complicated, Liam. Sometimes they get scared when someone shakes up their little world. But that doesn't mean you were wrong. You saved that man's life." "I just wish they could see it that way," Liam mumbled. "I didn't mean to upset anyone." "Give it time," his mom said, squeezing his hand. "They'll come around." The following day, Liam was finishing his paper route when something unexpected happened. As he passed Mrs. Whittaker's house, the front door opened. "Liam," she called out, her voice hesitant. He stopped and turned, surprised. Mrs. Whittaker stepped onto the porch, holding a small tin of cookies. "I made these for you," she said, her cheeks flushed. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I shouldn't have ignored you. What you did for Mr. Darrow was brave." Liam stared at her, stunned. "Thank you, Mrs. Whittaker." She gave him a small, nervous smile. "You're a good boy, Liam. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Later that day, as Liam approached Mr. Collier's house, the older man was already waiting on the porch. "Hey, kid," Mr. Collier called out, his tone softer than before. "Come here a second." Liam hesitated but walked up the steps. Mr. Collier handed him a steaming mug of cocoa. "Figured you could use this. It's cold out there." Liam blinked in surprise. "Thanks." The man nodded, his gaze distant. "Look, I was wrong. What you did for Bernard, well, it wasn't my place to judge. You did good, kid. Better than most adults around here would have." Liam felt a lump rise in his throat. "Thank you, Mr. Collier." "Don't mention it," he said, waving him off. "Now get back to your route before your cocoa gets cold." By the end of the week, something remarkable happened. The neighbors, once cold and distant, began to change. They waved at Liam as he rode by, some even stepping outside to greet him. Whispers of judgment were replaced with quiet admiration. And then, a group of neighbors organized a cleanup day for Mr. Darrow's house. Liam joined them, working alongside people who had once avoided him. Together, they scrubbed, painted, and repaired the little house on Cedar Lane. By the end of the day, the house looked brighter, almost alive again. As Liam stood back, covered in paint and dirt, he saw something that made his chest tighten. Mr. Darrow, frail but smiling, sat on his freshly cleaned porch. He gave Liam a small nod, his eyes filled with gratitude. As winter gave way to spring, Cedar Lane underwent a transformation that went beyond fresh coats of paint or neatly trimmed hedges. The change wasn't just physical, it was in the way people interacted, how they lingered longer to chat with one another or offered help without hesitation. Liam Hudson, once just the quiet delivery boy, had unknowingly become the spark for this transformation. One Saturday morning, a community potluck was organized, something unheard of before the incident with Mr. Darrow. Tables lined the small park at the end of the street, covered with homemade dishes from every house. Liam hesitated at first, unsure if he should attend, but when Mrs. Whittaker personally came to invite him, he couldn't say no. As Liam arrived with his mom and younger sister, he was met with warm smiles and waves. "There he is," Mr. Collier called, raising a cup of iced tea. "The hero of Cedar Lane." Liam's face turned red. "I'm not a hero," he muttered. But the words were drowned out by applause from the gathered neighbors. The potluck wasn't just about food. It was about acknowledging how far they'd come as a community. Liam watched as Mr. Darrow, now noticeably healthier, was helped to a seat by his son, Dr. Evan Darrow. The old man's presence alone was enough to bring a hush over the crowd. "Before we dig in," Dr. Darrow said, standing next to his father, I want to say a few words. My dad. He's never been one for crowds, but he insisted on being here today. He wanted to thank all of you, especially Liam, for showing him the kindness he didn't know he needed. Mr. Darrow, his voice still raspy but strong enough to carry, added, "You all reminded me that no one is ever truly alone. And, young man," he said, looking at Liam, "you reminded me that even the smallest gestures can change everything." Liam felt a lump in his throat as everyone turned to him. He nodded, unsure what to say, but his mom squeezed his shoulder and whispered, "Just be yourself." Taking a deep breath, Liam stood. "I didn't do it for recognition or thanks," he began. I saw someone who needed help, and I couldn't walk away. But what happened after, that wasn't just me. It was all of you. You came together. You turned this street into something better, and I'm proud to be part of it." The crowd erupted in applause, and for the first time, Liam didn't feel the need to hide. He stood tall, smiling, as neighbors clapped him on the back and shook his hand. A few days later, as Liam finished his route, he noticed Dr. Darrow waiting by Mr. Darrow's house. He waved Liam over. "I've been meaning to talk to you," Dr. Darrow said. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Liam. Have you ever thought about working in healthcare?" Liam blinked. "Healthcare? Me?" Dr. Darrow nodded. "You've got the instincts for it. Recognizing when someone needs help, taking action without hesitation, that's rare. If you're interested, I know a volunteer program at the local hospital. It's not glamorous, but it's a good start." Liam thought about it on his ride home. He'd never considered something like that before, but the idea stuck with him. Maybe there was more he could do, more people he could help. As summer rolled in, Liam joined the volunteer program, splitting his time between his paper route and assisting at the hospital. It wasn't easy. Balancing work, school, and volunteering often left him exhausted, but he found a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt before. At the hospital, Liam met people from all walks of life, patients, nurses, doctors, all with their own stories. Some days were hard, especially when patients didn't recover. But then there were moments that made it all worth it, like when a young boy recovering from surgery gave Liam a crayon drawing of a hero. Meanwhile, back on Cedar Lane, the community continued to thrive. Neighbors who had once been distant were now actively looking out for one another. Mr. Collier started organizing regular cleanups for elderly residents. Mrs. Whitaker launched a neighborhood newsletter with a section dedicated to celebrating small acts of kindness. Even Mr. Darrow, who had once been a recluse, became more involved. On his better days, he joined the neighborhood gatherings, sharing stories of his younger years and encouraging others to stay connected. One evening, as Liam sat on his porch looking out over the street, his mom joined him. "You've done so much for this neighborhood," she said. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Liam nodded. "Sometimes. It feels like it was so long ago, but it really wasn't. I didn't think something as simple as making a call could lead to all this." His mom smiled. "It wasn't just the call, Liam. It was your heart. That's what made the difference." As the stars appeared in the night sky, Liam thought about what lay ahead. The volunteer program, his paper route, the community he'd helped reshape. It was all just the beginning. There were still challenges to face, both on Cedar Lane and beyond. But for the first time, Liam felt ready to meet them. Because sometimes, all it takes is one small act to start a ripple that changes everything. And just when you think the story has reached its end, you realize it's only the beginning of something better. What would you have done in Liam's shoes? Let us know by commenting 2 feet if you loved this journey, or 7 feet if you think it could have gone another way. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Elderly Wisdom for more heartwarming tales. See you in the next story.